welcome to day two of the Futureprint Leaders Summit. The keynote for today is a gentleman by the name of Martin-FAGG, who is a behavioural economist, and we're going to ask him to explain what that is a little later. He specialises in making economics understandable for the masses, which is a brilliant thing, particularly when you've only got 25 minutes to present. The session is called Get Ready for the Coming Boom, and Roger comes with quite a lengthy and impressive list of people he's worked for, including the New Zealand Treasury, Bank of England. He's also the author of a book called Making Sense of the Economy, and is visiting faculty at Duke, Ashridge, Henley and Bath Business School. So all respected and very well known business schools. So welcome, Roger.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to looking forward to this session. So first off, explain a little bit about what a behavioural economist is.
Okay, well, look, thanks for giving me this opportunity, and hello everybody who's tuned in. A behavioural economist is someone who doesn't accept mainstream economic thinking. And mainstream economists think that you and I, most of the time, will take rational decisions, behave rationally. And the problem I have with that is I haven't yet met a rational human being. Everyone I know works on instinct, gut, and then rationalizes their choice after they've made the decision. And so a behavioral economist actually looks at what drives economies, which is emotion, wanting to survive, wanting to grow your own business, rather than this rational analysis of data. And the thing about mainstream economists when they're forecasting is they are always precisely wrong. Whereas we behavioralists try and judge the mood of people, and when we're forecasting, we're broadly right. So the question is it best to be precisely wrong or broadly right? What I'm going to do is show you why there is going to be one hell of a boom over the next few years, and you need to get ready for it. So I'm going to share my screen, Marcus, and off we go. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. GDP is the value of all goods and services sold. And note that it's all goods and services sold, not necessarily produced. And that's interesting. A bit later on, we'll see why. And in the short run, that's 2 to 3 years out. GDP depends on how much money there is in our system, multiplied by how quickly that money changes hands. So to understand this, I want you to think of a garden hose pipe. And this pipe is attached to the wall. You turn on the tap. Depending how long the pipe is, water flows through the pipe and comes out the other end. Of course, we assume there are no holes in the pipe. And with a time lag, what comes out will equal what went in. Now, the economy is just like a great big hose pipe. What goes in is money, and what comes out is nominal GDP, and velocity is how quickly the money flows through the pipe. Okay, so here's the pipe, and monetary policy is the Bank of England or the European Central Bank or the Federal Reserve setting interest rates, which has a direct impact on how much people are willing to borrow and hence the money supply. And fiscal policy is actually governments changing the flow within the pipe by redistributing existing money from those who've got lots of it to those who haven't got much of it. And normally those two policies are quite separate. But since COVID, monetary policy and fiscal policy have been closely integrated. I will explain shortly. So when it comes to money, what people don't realize is that banks, commercial banks, are the biggest manufacturing business on this planet. And they manufacture money. They don't manufacture jangling or folding money, but we don't use that anymore. The money we spend is always a credit transfer. It's a digit that moves from one computer to the other. But that digit only comes into existence when a bank agrees to make a loan to somebody. So in this example here, a bank agrees a £100 loan for perhaps you. And when you think you've agreed the loan, you think you've got £100 extra to spend. So when the bank creates the loan, it simultaneously creates £100 of electronic money and places it in your account. So the simple way of understanding this, every new loan creates a new bank deposit. And the money supply of a country is literally the sum of the liabilities of the commercial banking system. Now go back to the hose pipe. So there you are watering your garden, and your neighbour, who is substantially overweight, comes round, stands on your pipe. Of course, what will happen is the flow out of the pipe will reduce to a trickle. But the flow going into the pipe at the tap end doesn't change. And so lockdowns round the world are when your overweight neighbour is standing on your country's economic pipe. In the UK, a year ago, when we began lockdown, within a quarter, nominal GDP, the flow out of the pipe reduced by 20%. But then something else happened, which is what is so unusual and what all the mainstream models don't have in them. Governments in the Western world, and indeed in the Eastern world, decided they needed to protect businesses and employees' incomes. So there were grants and furlough schemes and an extension of social support. And the money for all these schemes came from not a commercial bank, not from savings, but from the government's own bank, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, who undertook to create enough money to meet government's commitments for furloughing and grants. And so, going back to our garden analogy, your neighbour stands on the pipe and someone actually turns the tap up at the wall. So what builds up in the pipe is a huge pressure of potential flow. And of course, as soon as the neighbour lifts their foot off the pipe, that flow gushes through the pipe. And this is why we are going to have one hell of a boom as soon as people can spend all this new money. This is probably the most important chart. And this shows you what's happened to money. This is for the UK. I'll tell you what's happened in America and Europe in a moment. The red line is the money supply. That's the liabilities of the banking system. The black line is the asset side of the banking system's balance sheet, so it's their lending. Now, normally, money supply goes up because lending goes up, i.e. 2015 to 2019. That is where the system is operating normally. But there have been two exceptional periods. Quantitative easing one, which was after the financial crash. That's where the Bank of England created money, which was given straight to the commercial banking system in order that they survived. That QE1 money did not go into the pockets of businesses or families. And that's why QE1 rescued banks, but for 4 years, there was very little real growth. The flow out of our pipes did not increase by very much. QE2 is quite different. You can see there that the black line, which is commercial bank lending, is running at the normal rate, but the red line is running at 14% year on year. The difference between the 4% growth and the 14% growth is what the Bank of England's creating. Now, normally the money supply goes up by about 4-5% a year in the UK, in Europe, in America. Right now, our money supply in the UK is growing by 14%. In Europe, it's growing by 14%. And in America, it's growing by 25%. And in Canada, it's growing by nearly 30%. This is all money that's come into existence through COVID support. And it's there. I'm going to show you. Again, this is the UK, but it's replicated in the Western world. Normally, the amount of money in business and household accounts increases by 8 billion a month. Since March last year, the average increase per month has been 30 billion. The only problem is, of course, is people have been unable to spend it. So, again, looking at the world, the general view is in mature economies, a 5% growth in money supply is desirable. Anything above 10% is significantly inflationary. And there you see, it's a bit out of date, this data now, but there you see, there's America, 29% growth in money supply. And the 1.8 trillion support that Biden has just put in, that'll be financed by the central bank too. So America is going to be red hot over the next few years. And the UK and the European area, well, we're not that far behind. You know, both, this chart is a bit out of date now, as I said, both 14% increase in money supply, well above 10%. Now, the media have been banging on about, well, all this new money created by the central banks is actually underwritten by bonds which are issued by the government. And this is the national debt. And the media is saying, oh, yeah, our children have to pay for this, taxes are going to rise. Well, this is wrong. So let's now take your business and you go to a bank for a loan. What they'll look at is your debt to equity ratio. In other words, how much debt as a proportion of your balance sheet is there going to be? And if your debt to equity, i.e. your loans around 25% of your balance sheet, they'll say, no problem, we're happy to lend to you. Oh, providing you can cover the interest bill at a multiple of your profits. The interest cover you expect to have is normally at least 3 times or more. So let's look at a country like the UK. The asset value is 10 trillion. The debt is 2.3 trillion. That's a 22% debt equity ratio, which means if you look at Britain as a business, we're underborrowed, we're underleveraged. The interest bill is 7% of a year's tax income or 3% of a year's income as a country. We are not over borrowed or indebted. And indeed, the Bank of England, as the Federal Reserve, is an arm of government, and neither are supposed to make a profit. So when they do, because they're getting all this new interest on the bonds, all that happens is the interest is paid back to the government. It doesn't come near taxpayers. So why do I think there's going to be a boom? You and I like monetary equilibrium. That means we like to have a certain amount of money in our current account at the end of each month. And when we look at our bank statement, we look at that number. If it is above what we're comfortable with, we go, oh, this is ridiculous having all this money sitting here, I'm going to spend it. If it's below what we're comfortable with, we immediately cut back our spend to build the balance back. So a recession is caused by insufficient money, and a boom is caused by excess money. There is excess money in the Western world, and this is where it goes. When zero is a year ago, the first thing that happens is particularly high net worth people buy more equities. And they buy Uber shares, or they buy Musk shares, or they buy Bitcoin. And then you see those prices soar. And then after about 6 months, the money begins to find its way into real estate. This is why in the UK, house prices rose 7% last year, and all the mainstream forecasters said the prices would fall. And they've said prices will fall this year. They are wrong. Prices will rise 10% this year. That's real estate. And then after about 2 years, you begin to see this money really feeding on retail prices. So after 2 years, you get retail price inflation, and then wages follow to try and make up for the loss in purchasing power. Now, normally interest rates go up at around the consumer price increase point 2 years out, but it's not going to happen this time because governments are going to want booms to be really well established before they cut it back. So interest rates aren't going to be rising until 3 years from now. In the UK, there's 150 billion of pent-up demand in household bank accounts. To give you a sense, 1 month of GDP is 200 billion in total. This chart just shows you house prices, that's the blue dot, average, compared to money supply. And thing to note, in 2013, the government said it was going to underwrite the housing market. House prices immediately took off, even though the money supply wasn't taking off. If you look at where we are today, money supply has taken off. And we heard in the budget that the government is going to underwrite 95% mortgage. There is no doubt that house prices are going to take off this year. If we look globally, then what we've got is, thanks to COVID, supply in the global system has been limited, but potential spend has grown significantly. We've nearly got one whole USA appearing on the globe surface in this last year. So this money is going to drive up global inflation. I have no doubt. So I was asked to look at innovation, particularly digital innovation. And I'm getting near the end of my session. COVID has been a tremendous stimulus for change. And it's actually increased the rate of innovation significantly. Now, a guy called Schumpeter created a theory of what he called creative destruction, which is where new ways of doing things drive out the old ways. And it's now firmly established, based on research, that innovations tend to cluster in particular sectors. So in your sector, the print sector, you get all these amazing new digital printing machines, and this spins off all sorts of new ways of creating posters and big displays and so on. And that in itself changes the way advertisers work. And so you get a significant uptick in economic activity driven by innovation. And it creates a long cycle of about 50 years, which is 30 years of expansion, followed by 20 years of slower growth. Right, so let's look at the big cycles. And the thing to note is that it's clear the cycles, I said 50 years, well, they're shortening. First big upturn was around 1780s. That's water power, textiles, iron, and we had this great big industrial revolution. And then the next wave comes in with steam, rail, and steel. And that's about 1845, created the great big growth phase of Britain, of America, of Europe. And then we get the third wave, which driven by electricity, the internal combustion engine and chemicals. Then we get the fourth wave after the Second World War, petrochemicals, jet aviation, the world getting smaller. And the fifth wave sort of began with the internet and the microchip. And we're now seeing that wave has gathered momentum, and we were expecting it to slow down, but for COVID. What COVID has done is forced an awful lot of businesses online. It's forced an awful lot of people to say, look, I really need to change the way my business works if I'm going to succeed here. So I'm one of those people who says, yeah, COVID, bad if you're someone you love is dead, but in terms of economic growth, it's a real kicker. For me, the next big thing is quantum computing. It's 1,000 times quicker than existing computers, and this is going to allow big data, massive change in medicine, in printing, in everything. And it's going to create unemployment. And the unemployment's going to be in that third category there, administrative and support services. In short, back office automation is going to take off. So this is the UK's real GDP growth forecast from the mechanics, the rational economists, and they're expecting growth to be pretty subdued, under 2% up to 2025. I think that forecast is wrong. We should expect 2.5% to nearly 3% with inflation over the next few years. So the future is digital. It's going to raise productivity. It's going to raise real incomes. White-collar unemployment will increase, but luckily white-collar workers are more flexible. They can be retrained. The massive increase in the money supply will ensure there will be no shortage of demand. And in the UK, in the budget last week, the government announced that companies can have 130% investment allowance. That is a massive stimulus for digitization. And so there is no doubt in my mind the next 4 years will see an inflationary boom in Europe, in the UK, and in the United States. I hope you're ready for it, because it's going to be a biggie. And you might say, will it end in tears? It probably will, around 2029. History does repeat itself. So I think that's my 25 minutes. And I hope I've given you some understanding of how things are likely to pan out over the next year or so.
That's brilliant, Roger. Thanks very much. So it's some real positives in there, and I think it's interesting that you're initially saying that behavioural economists tend to look at things quite different to the traditional type of, slightly more, to some extent, more optimistic and taking into account the emotional side of people, which is in essence what we are, emotional beings, aren't we? Also very interesting, the digital aspect you mentioned, thanks for that you feel it's COVID's accelerated change, and that actually the digitization of the world will become even more prevalent. That's interesting as well. And the impact on innovation, because that's something that's rich within our industry, is innovation. I sense that that's going to be a key driver in the future. Is that something?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Innovate or die. That must be your watchword.
Yeah, innovate or die. And just one other thing, you mentioned inflation. That's obviously a byproduct of growth, isn't it? Inflation.
It's a byproduct of growth with too much money. Yeah. So what lots of money does, it produces the growth and then the inflation.
Yeah. And the inflation means interest rates rise and all of those different things. Yeah. That governments often want to try to control. Well, listen, thanks so much for that. It's really interesting and optimistic, I think, and that's what we all need right now. So thanks very much for that. And hope to see you again in one of our future events, I think.
Well, thank you, Marcus. And if I'm wrong, my career's over.
Okay. No, let's hope you're right. Brilliant. Thanks very much.